Welcome to Module 1, Lesson 5, Interpretivism and Constructivism. Today we explore paradigms that offer a fundamentally different way of understanding reality and knowledge than the positivist traditions we've been examining. Where positivism seeks a single objective truth through detached observation, interpretivism and constructivism embrace multiple realities, subjective understanding, and the researcher as an active participant in knowledge creation. These paradigms emerge from a recognition that human experience, meaning, and social phenomena cannot be fully captured through quantitative measurement and controlled experiments. They acknowledge that humans are not objects to be studied, but meaning-making beings whose experiences and interpretations shape their realities. As we journey through this lesson, I want you to consider how these paradigms might offer valuable insights into aspects of your field that seem resistant to quantitative capture, the nuances of human experience, the complexity of social interactions, and the richness of lived meanings. By the end of our 10 minutes together, you'll understand not just the principles of these paradigms, but how they offer legitimate alternative paths to knowledge that complement rather than compete with scientific approaches. Our learning objectives today will guide us through understanding these meaning-centered paradigms and their implications for research. First, we'll identify the key principles of interpretivist and constructivist paradigms, understanding their philosophical foundations and core assumptions about reality, knowledge, and human experience. Second, we'll compare these approaches with positivist traditions, not to determine which is better, but to understand how different paradigmatic assumptions lead to different research questions, methods, and insights. Third, we'll analyze the methodological implications of interpretivist assumptions, exploring how beliefs about multiple realities and co-created knowledge translate into specific research practices. These objectives will help you recognize when interpretivist approaches might be appropriate for your research questions and understand the rigor and systematic nature of qualitative inquiry. Understanding these paradigms is essential for appreciating the full spectrum of research approaches available to us and recognizing that different questions require different methods of investigation. Let's begin by exploring the origins and influences that shaped interpretivist and constructivist thinking, understanding how these paradigms emerged as a reaction against the limitations of positivism. Phenomenology, founded by Edmund Husserl, focused on the study of consciousness and lived experience, arguing that we can only understand reality through how it appears to human consciousness. Hans-Georg Gadamer's hermeneutics emphasized the interpretation of meaning and texts, recognizing that understanding always occurs within a historical and cultural context that shapes our interpretations. Max Weber's concept of Verstehen, or interpretive understanding, argued that social science must go beyond external observation to understand the subjective meanings that guide human action. These philosophical traditions converged around a central insight. Human beings are fundamentally different from the objects studied by natural science because they create meaning, interpret their experiences, and construct their social worlds through interaction. This represented a profound challenge to positivism's assumption that social phenomena could be studied using the same methods as natural phenomena. The interpretivist paradigm emerged not as a rejection of rigor or systematic inquiry, but as a recognition that understanding human experience requires methods that can capture meaning, context, and subjective experience. Understanding interpretivist and constructivist research assumptions requires examining how these paradigms fundamentally reimagine the nature of reality and knowledge. Ontologically, interpretivism assumes multiple constructed realities rather than a single objective truth. Reality is not out there waiting to be discovered, but is actively constructed through human consciousness, language, and social interaction. Different people can experience and interpret the same situation in fundamentally different ways, and all of these interpretations represent legitimate realities. Epistemologically, knowledge is seen as interactive and co-created between researcher and participant rather than discovered through detached observation. The researcher cannot stand outside the phenomenon being studied, but necessarily participates in creating the understanding that emerges. Methodologically, interpretivism favors naturalistic, qualitative, and inductive approaches that allow meanings to emerge from data rather than testing predetermined hypotheses. Research designs are flexible and emergent, adapting to what is learned during the inquiry process. Quality criteria shift from validity and reliability to trustworthiness, authenticity, and credibility. The question is not whether findings can be replicated, but whether they provide deep, contextual understanding that resonates with participants' experiences and provides insights into the phenomenon under study. The major interpretivist traditions each offer unique perspectives and methods for understanding human experience and social reality. Phenomenology focuses on lived experience and consciousness, seeking to understand phenomena as they appear to those experiencing them, bracketing assumptions to get at the essence of experiences. This approach is particularly powerful for understanding experiences of illness, trauma, transformation, or any phenomenon where the subjective experience is central. Hermeneutics emphasizes interpretation of meaning and texts, recognizing that understanding is always interpretive and occurs within horizons of meaning, shaped by history, culture, and language. This tradition is valuable for understanding how people make sense of their experiences and how meaning is created and transmitted through texts and narratives. Symbolic interactionism focuses on how meaning emerges through social interaction, examining how people create shared meanings through their interactions and how these meanings shape behavior and identity. This approach illuminates how social realities are constructed and maintained through everyday interactions. Social constructionism takes this further, arguing that all knowledge and reality is socially constructed through language, discourse, and social practices. These traditions share a commitment to understanding the world from the perspective of those living in it, recognizing that human experience cannot be reduced to variables and statistical relationships. Comparing interpretivism with positivism reveals fundamental differences in how these paradigms approach research and knowledge creation. Where positivism assumes a single objective reality that exists independently of observers, interpretivism recognizes multiple realities constructed through human consciousness and social interaction. In terms of knowledge creation, positivism seeks to discover pre-existing truths through observation and measurement, while interpretivism sees knowledge as co-created through the interaction between researcher and participants. emerging through dialogue and interpretation. Methodologically, positivism relies primarily on quantitative, experimental methods that maintain distance between researcher and subject, while interpretivism employs qualitative, naturalistic methods that embrace the researcher's involvement in the research process. The researcher's role differs dramatically. In positivism, the researcher strives to be a detached, objective observer who minimizes their influence on what is studied, while in interpretivism, the researcher is an active participant whose subjectivity and interpretive frameworks are acknowledged as part of the research process. The ultimate goals also differ. Positivism seeks prediction and control through discovering universal laws, while interpretivism seeks understanding and meaning through exploring particular experiences and contexts. These differences aren't weaknesses, but reflect different purposes and different aspects of human experience that each paradigm is suited to explore. Researcher positioning in interpretivist research represents a radical departure from positivist ideals of detachment and objectivity. Reflexivity becomes central, with researchers acknowledging themselves as the primary instrument of inquiry, whose experiences, assumptions, and interpretive frameworks shape what they notice, how they interact with participants, and how they make sense of data. Rather than trying to eliminate subjectivity, interpretivist researchers embrace it while being transparent about how their perspectives influence the research. This involves ongoing critical self-reflection about one's position in relation to participants and the phenomenon being studied. Acknowledging subjectivity doesn't mean anything goes. It means being rigorous about examining and articulating how one's perspective shapes the inquiry. Transparency about positionality involves clearly stating one's background, assumptions, theoretical commitments, and relationship to the research topic and participants. This transparency allows readers to understand the lens through which interpretations were made. Ethical considerations become particularly complex when representing others' experiences, requiring sensitivity to power dynamics, careful attention to whose voices are heard and how they're represented, and commitment to honoring participants' meanings rather than imposing external interpretations. The researcher becomes a translator, an interpreter of human experience, bearing responsibility for how other stories are told. The methodological implications of interpretivist assumptions shape every aspect of the research process, from design to dissemination. Data collection methods prioritize depth over breadth, using in-depth interviews that explore participants' experiences and meanings, observations that capture context and interaction, and narratives that preserve the complexity and temporality of human experience. These methods generate rich, detailed data that preserves the voice and perspective of participants. Analysis approaches are interpretive rather than statistical, using thematic analysis to identify patterns of meaning, narrative analysis to understand how people story their experiences, and interpretive phenomenological analysis to explore lived experience. The goal is not to reduce data to numbers, but to develop deep, nuanced understanding that preserves complexity. Sample sizes are typically small and purposefully selected for their ability to provide information-rich cases that illuminate the phenomenon of interest. The focus is on depth of understanding rather than statistical representation. Research designs are emergent and flexible, adapting as understanding develops, rather than following rigid protocols. This flexibility allows researchers to follow unexpected insights and adjust their approach based on what they're learning. The entire process is iterative, with data collection and analysis occurring simultaneously, each informing the other in a hermeneutic spiral of deepening understanding. As we conclude this lesson, I invite you to engage in self-reflection about these paradigms and their potential relevance to your own research interests. First, consider how comfortable you are with the idea of multiple constructed realities versus a single objective reality. Does the notion that different people can have fundamentally different but equally valid experiences of the same phenomenon challenge or resonate with your worldview? Second, think about what challenges you might face if conducting research from an interpretivist perspective. How would you handle the ambiguity, the lack of clear procedures, the responsibility of interpretation, and the challenge of establishing credibility without traditional validity measures? Third, imagine how a research question you're interested in would transform if approached interpretively. Instead of asking, what is the effect of X on Y, you might ask, how do people experience X, or what meaning does Y have for those involved? These reflections can help you understand whether and when interpretivist approaches might be valuable for your research and what capacities you might need to develop to use these methods effectively. Let me leave you with 4 key takeaways that capture the essence of interpretivism and constructivism and their contribution to research methodology. First, reality is socially constructed and multiple. There's no single truth waiting to be discovered, but multiple realities created through human consciousness, language, and social interaction. This doesn't mean anything goes, but that different perspectives offer different truths. Second, knowledge emerges through interaction and interpretation rather than through detached observation. Understanding requires engagement, dialogue, and recognition that the researcher participates in creating the knowledge that emerges. Third, researcher subjectivity is embraced, not eliminated. Rather than pretending to be objective, interpretivist researchers acknowledge and examine how their perspectives shape the research while maintaining rigor through reflexivity and transparency. Fourth, methods focus on understanding rather than prediction. The goal is not to discover laws that allow prediction and control, but to develop deep contextual understanding that illuminates human experience and social phenomena. As we move forward to explore critical and transformative paradigms in the next lesson, remember that interpretivism offers essential tools for understanding aspects of human experience that cannot be quantified or experimentally manipulated, providing crucial insights into the meanings, experiences, and social constructions that shape human life.